Good evening to you, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to Fireside Chat with Eimear 51, brought to you by the Order of Bards, OBODs and Druids. This is a pre-recorded conversation as I cannot live stream tonight. So it seemed a little strange not to be looking at the comments and welcoming you on board. Nonetheless, you are welcome. So my guest this evening is from Baton Rouge in Louisiana in the US. And let me welcome Art Scarborough. Art, you are so welcome to this Fireside Chat.
Well, good morning. I'm delighted to be here.
Great. So you're in Baton Rouge. So can you tell our viewers what Baton Rouge is like? And
Sure. Baton Rouge is the capital of Louisiana. It's located about 60 miles north of New Orleans, and it sits on the banks of the Mississippi River. To the west of us, we get into a broad floodplain, and in West Louisiana, which is where a lot of rice is grown and a lot of sugarcane is grown.
Mm-hmm.
To the east of us are primarily pine forests, and that's actually the remains of the great eastern pine forest, which at one time spread from the east coast all the way to the Mississippi River.
Wow.
It was one of the largest pine forests in the world, probably the largest pine forest in the world at the time. The gold rush, if you will, in Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and Florida was around the gathering of those trees and the end of those trees, really. We're in a part of the world that was occupied by a Native American group called the Choctaw.
Mm-hmm.
They've been here since about 12,000 years ago, so they've been here for a little while. Now, I say that they've been in the area. The Native Americans have been in the area. The Choctaw actually moved into this part of the world from Texas about 2,000 years ago. And their creation myths center around that. So the spirits of the land here are very strong. When we talk about the Native American folk.
Mm-hmm.
And then obviously when the Europeans came in, we brought our own spiritualities and our own spirits with us. Our bones now are intermixed with this land, just like the bones of the people that were here. And that's Louisiana.
Okay. So you mentioned in a previous conversation about you follow a particular band of Choctaw?
Yes, I'm fascinated. I say fascinated. I'm very interested in the Mississippi Band of Choctaw. It's a group north of here in Philadelphia, Mississippi. And they are the remnants of a group of Choctaw that refused to leave during the expulsion of the Choctaw, or expulsion of the Native Americans from the East. They stayed in the area and essentially lived in poverty from 1826 until the 1950s. In the 1950s, they elected a chief who came up with the idea that if they would grow their own lawyers and accountants, mm-hmm. and develop their own tribal industries, that they would be better off. And they have done that, and it's a thriving community now. It's a reservation of about 6,000 inhabitants on the reservation itself. And they've retrieved or recovered about 50,000 acres of land that originally was once Choctaw land. So they're fascinating people. And I like the sense of community they have and their sense of connection with their own ancestors, mm-hmm. and where they've been and where they're going. Now, people that follow me on my Facebook page will see a lot of stuff about the Mississippi Band of Choctaw. I like to pass on their news articles.
Oh, lovely, lovely. And it's so you mentioned that the Mississippi Band of Choctaw be able to connect with their ancestors. How do you connect with your ancestors in Baton Rouge?
Well, in a number of different ways. I've done some genealogical research, and we can track my paternal ancestors back to a family of wheelwrights who in the 1600s lived on Hoosier Street in London. They were friends with a fellow named William Penn.
Ah.
And William Penn talked John Scarborough into coming to the New World and sold him some 462 acres in Pennsylvania. So John came with his son, John, 14-year-old boy. They arrived in the New World, started their farm, and the senior went back to London to get his wife and bring the family over. Well, apparently he got home and described the wonderful cruise from England to the United States or to the New World. And she said, screw that, I'm not going. So he never returned. So our entire line from 1682 till today came from a 14-year-old boy who was left here by his parents. And then our family, my paternal family, moved down through the new territories into what was then Alabama and Mississippi, and then we wound up in Louisiana. On my mother's side, my mother's people came from Ireland in the late 1800s and settled in New England. Now, how I arrived was my father was in the Army in World War II, and is typical of the United States Army. They took boys from the far south and stationed them in the far north. So he was stationed on Baffin Island, and to transition back into the States, they assigned him to an air base in Manchester, New Hampshire, where he met this red-haired Irish girl, and the rest is history, so as they speak. Now, I do visit the graves of my parents, my grandparents, and my great-grandparents that are available in the local area. And I have chats with them, actually. Now, I'm actually chatting with them, or it's a psychological construct, is totally irrelevant. It does little good for me. And I enjoy that. And I think people should do that more, because it's good for us to know where we come from, and it helps us get an idea of where we're going. It helps us give us a sense of continuity from the past into the present and then into the future. So that's basically how I connect with my ancestors, is through direct interaction, a little genealogical research, and just walking in the woods where they walked.
That's lovely.
I think we've had another kink in the system.
I don't know what happened.
There you are.
I'm back. So let's continue with our conversation.
Okay.
I think the question was, how do, yes, when you were talking about your, you have that connection with your ancestors.
Right.
So people who are watching who don't know who their ancestors are, how would you advise them as druids to connect with their ancestors?
I think there are a couple of approaches to that. If you don't have a starting point to go back, you don't have a genealogical record to refer to, or anything like that, probably the simplest approach is to find a quiet spot and sit down and just be still and let them come to you, let them talk to you. And surprisingly enough, they will. And here again, there's no real relevance in whether they are actually talking to you or whether it's a construct in your own mind. It's still good for you. And that probably is easiest and most direct approach for people to do that, I think.
That's really interesting. I remember I have this very close friend, Shaban Kalula. I may have mentioned him in previous chats. He's a traditional healer from Tanzania. Part of his training was that he was to contact an ancestor he never knew, and that he became a guide for him. And I was having a healing session last week, and something about my ancestors came up, and the healer asked me to go back many generations. And I went back as far as an ancestor I didn't know.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
And engaged with him, and then it involved some kind of healing for him because of the hurt that he had was having an impact on me. Yeah. And I thought, yes, you actually don't need to know who they are. It's nice if you do, but it doesn't make, because I know for some people feel I don't know who my ancestors are. Where do I belong? But I think that idea of sitting still and waiting for them to come, I think is I like that idea.
And surprisingly enough, they will. A lot of people say, well, I sat for an hour and nothing happened. But it's the same phenomenon as some people sit around and wait for the talent of blowing fireballs out of your fingertips. That's not going to happen either. So much of that is subtle, and looking for that subtlety or waiting for that subtlety is good for you in and of itself, I think.
Yeah. And often, subtle messages can be very, very, well, they're so subtle, they seem very mundane, but actually often the profound can be seen in the mundane.
Exactly. Absolutely. I agree totally. We tend to expect too much sometimes. And the things that we get that are subtle and are not readily apparent at times have the most lasting and profound effect on us. Absolutely.
Yeah. So what brought you to druidry? I mean, you have English origins and you have Irish origins, but then you've been brought up for many generations, you come from a long line of
that.
What brought you to druidry?
It's hard to say exactly what brought me to druidry. I'd wandered around in sort of a spiritual quagmire for many years, dabbling in this, dabbling in that. Found a home with Unitarian Universalism and more than anything else. And then I read a little book, one of Philip's books, called The Druid Way, which is just a walk across the landscape. And there was something in that book that resonated. And I started looking into it. And next thing I knew, I joined the order. And the next thing I knew, I found that druidry became part and parcel of my life and part and parcel of me. So how exactly what made that push, I don't know. I can relate it to that book. I can relate it to a lot of different things, but it just became part of me and became part of who I am today. and has made a tremendous difference in my life. And a tremendous
examples.
An example would be, I retired a number of years ago.
Mm-hmm.
I was one of the founding members and the president of the Louisiana Master Naturalist of Greater Baton Rouge. I trained as a master naturalist.
Mm-hmm.
I trained as a master naturalist as an extension of druidry.
Okay.
I have been, and I'm the current chair of the local herb society. And I became interested in that and involved in that as an offshoot of druidry. So it's just had this tremendous impact on me. People often ask me when I came out of the closet. Never did, because I was never in a closet. From day one, I was perfectly comfortable being out and about as a druid.
Right.
And I've never had any trouble with that.
You've never had anyone be hostile towards you or anything, or I mean, they may see you as weird, but that's part of the thing. But you haven't had any hostility in.
Not really hostile. I've had people tell me that I will pay a price.
Okay.
That kind of thing. But I think if you are open and sincere, most people just accept it for what it is. And I think the reality is most people really don't care. Some feel compelled to make an issue out of it, but they really don't care when you peel that onion back. It's easier to be who you are out and in the world than it is to try to hold that in. Our local grove, is now one of the longest running groves in OBOD. Really,
okay.
We've been around since around 2000, 2001. Highland Oak has gone through ups and downs like anybody else, but we have survived.
Mm-hmm.
We have, to a large extent, thrived. Now, the pandemic has had a great impact on us, as it has on everybody else.
Indeed.
But we've made changes to accommodate that, such as going to hybrid growth meetings.
Yeah.
And we've had hybrid ceremonies. And we do all of our ceremonies in a hybrid fashion now, so people can participate from different places, and people who are not comfortable in being with other people right can participate.
So when you say hybrid, how do you manage that logistically? What does that look like?
We normally broadcast on Zoom.
Yeah.
At the same time that we're having the service, we have a member who is very good with technology, who sets that up for us and keeps that going through the ritual. So sometimes it's a little tricky, but thus far we've been able to make it work. And it keeps people engaged who otherwise could not remain engaged.
Okay, so you have a physical ceremony, and then you have a camera set up so that those who can't physically can watch. Okay, very good.
And we make sure that we build into the ceremony or to the rite aspects that allow people to participate, aspects that make sure that we can get participation from people who are only joining us online, if that makes sense.
How do you do that?
Well, we'll have, for instance, if we recite the unity prayer,
Mm-hmm.
we'll turn on the sound and let everybody do it at the same time.
Okay, lovely.
That kind of thing. Or we'll assign parts. We'll have parts for people who are on air. And we'll just turn on the sound and then let them do their part.
Okay, so you can interact with the viewers.
Yes.
So it's not just them viewing that you
Right.
actually. I'm impressed with your technological capabilities?
Well, the thing to be impressed is that we have people that can do that.
Even so.
But it has worked quite well, and it has kept people engaged through the pandemic that otherwise would not be able to be engaged.
Well, it's interesting how, like necessity being the mother of invention, how this pandemic has forced us into creating ways of remaining in contact. And I think you seem to have that hybrid approach, which I think is a really, really good one. But again, you need the technology, the technological skills to do that, which are probably a bit beyond me at the moment. But we're back doing physical ceremonies here in Ireland, which is great. Are you in the? You are.
Yes, yeah, we are.
Okay, wonderful. Yeah. So, for you as a druid, and you're also a member of the Unitarian Church, or if I've got the title right?
Yes, I'm also a member of the Unitarian Church.
Is druidry something you are or something you do? How do you look at druidry?
Both.
Yeah.
I prefer to think of it as something I am, because it has had such an encompassing impact on my life from a number of different standpoints. There was a time when I could easily be opinionated, overly opinionated, and I've gotten out of that with druidry. Surprisingly enough, I may not agree with all the opinions that I hear, but I make an effort to hear all the opinions that I can.
Wow.
I even every day I listen to about 5 different news broadcasts, some of which are utterly ridiculous and everything in between, but it gives a greater scope and understanding of what's going on around us. One of the interesting things, when I talk about the Unitarian Church, I've done a number of things at the church. One, I taught a series of classes on contemporary Western paganism at the church. That went over well. But I've also served as a mediator between pagans and the ministerial staff at the church.
Great.
And that has been very beneficial at times. And has worked out well. So I'm kind of like the
bridge,
the resident druid, I guess. The bridge there. So yeah, druidry means a tremendous amount to me because of the impact it has had on me. I'm a lot more tolerant of people. I often tell people I've never unfriended anybody on Facebook, and a lot of people find that totally shocking. But I've never found anybody that I needed to do that to.
Yeah.
And I have a lot of people who are friends that I don't agree with.
Yeah.
In fact, there was only one time that I had to block someone for a little while because they were a little too radical on one extreme or the other. I find I'm a lot more tolerant of people than I was 25 years ago. And druidry does that. Sometimes you get criticism for standing in the middle of controversy, but I think it's important that somebody does, because we need to find ways to communicate, and we're not really good at that as right now, if that makes any sense whatsoever.
I think it's great, because I think so much of the discourse we're pulled, or the temptation is to get stuck in polarity, and depending on how fundamentalist you are on either side, the more wedded you are, the more stuck you get, and the harder it is to come and actually move a little bit so that you might go towards looking at what the other is, and to be able to stand in the middle is it can be a lonely place, because both sides, you're neither with anybody. You can get condemned for not taking a position, but often the moderate position is, and it doesn't mean it's tolerating, and it doesn't mean it's colluding. It's just being able to see both. You don't have to agree to be able to see, and that's the important thing with people's viewpoints, is to be able to hear it. Doesn't mean you're agreeing with it or you're colluding with it, but the important thing is to hear it.
There's a school of thought in a lot of history circles right now that there are two things that hamper us in our study of history. One is presentism, where we tend to take the social norms of today and impose those on the past. And the other is oversimplification, where we'll try to simplify something that has happened in the past and make it too simple. Well, I think those two concepts extend into so much of our social interaction today.
Mm-hmm.
Both have a negative impact. There's a wonderful historian with University of California, Berkeley, named Aaron Shore. And he does a series of lectures on presentism and simplification that are just excellent for anybody that's interested in that kind of thing. But that's where we go with that, I think.
Mm-hmm.
We're more complicated than people give us credit for being.
We are certainly very complicated, and yet simplicity is so important, to be able to embrace simplicity, not be simple ourselves in that sense, be simplistic, but simple is that there's wonderful being in the simplicity of nature and all of that, and being still.
Absolutely. Oh, absolutely. We have a program. In Baton Rouge, we're fortunate we have one of the largest urban forests in the country.
Uh-huh.
We have a nearly 500-acre forest that was left by a family to Louisiana State University with the understanding that it would remain a natural area and it would never be commercialized.
Ooh.
And so we have a trail system through that, and we have a program called Trees and Trails. And Trees and Trails is where we take children, elementary school children, and take them on walks down these trails. The trails themselves are very neatly lined out and stone lined and the like. It's fascinating to me how many of these children from urban schools can take on those trails, and they're fine unless you ask them to step off the trail.
Okay.
And that scares them to death for a little while. So I occasionally serve as one of the guides for that.
Uh-huh.
When I have a group of children I'm taking, I make it a point at some point to cut across a corner or something, get them off the trail just a little bit and let them get their feet in the undergrowth and the like. And it just, they open up. And then that's a simplistic approach, because you're showing young people the reality of the world as opposed to what they're expecting. We don't have sidewalks everywhere, and that's a damn good thing.
Indeed. And it's funny, that expression, being on the straight and narrow, which is, we've all been taught to be, and stay on the straight and narrow, and you'll get to heaven or wherever the eternal reward is. And what you're teaching is that get off the straight and narrow and just play for a while and just see what it's like.
Exactly.
And explore danger, risk, the unknown, the unfamiliar, and what that might do and what that might bring up for you.
Yes. And I think that's important to us too.
I remember you taking us on a tour when I was at the Gulf Coast Gathering in 2019. It was on the grounds of an old house, but it was a 1,700-year-old tree.
Oh, the Seven Sisters.
The Seven Sisters.
Seven Sisters Oak. She is the president of the Live Oak Society. She's been standing in Louisville, Louisiana, outside of Mandeville, on the shores of Lake Pontchartrain for the last 1,700 years or so.
Well,
and she's still doing well, I might add.
That's brilliant to know, because as we were at that tree, I got a text from a friend, Sean, who's also a member of the order, and he was in Compton, Dundon. At the same time, we were at the Seven Sisters, and he sent me a photograph of the 1,700-year-old yew tree, which I am familiar with.
Mm-hmm.
So here I was getting a photograph of a 1,700-year-old tree while sitting beneath a 17-year-old other tree, and it was just absolutely the synchronicity was just incredible.
Oh, yes, indeed. That sounds very interesting. That's fascinating. Yeah, the Seven Sisters is one of the more popular stops on our Gulf Coast gathering tour schedule.
Yes. So I take it you hope to have another gathering in March, do you?
Yes, we are planning on reopening Gulf Coast gathering in March, unless something terrible happens. Now, there was some damage to the campsite by Hurricane Ida.
Really? Okay.
But they plan on having that repaired by the end of November or so that should not play into it. Should not be a factor. We're looking forward to that because it's been 2 years since we've been able to have one. We got people all over the country saying, when are you going to do it? When are you going to do it?
I was really impressed with the distances people drove. I mean, there were people who came who were just underneath the inside the Canadian border. Within the US, and driving 3-4 days to get there, then spending whatever it is, how many days at the gathering, and then driving 3 or 4 days back. That's commitment. That is really, because that's a pilgrimage. It's an expedition to be able to go, from the northern part of North America or of the US down as far as Louisiana. Yeah,
I think our farthest usual participant comes from Washington State.
Wow.
In the far northwest part of the country. We're happy people think enough of us to come that far.
Well, it certainly is an endorsement of you. It certainly is.
Well, we enjoy it, and we enjoy seeing people. We hope for a cool spell during that period each year. That doesn't always work out. We almost desiccated Christopher Hughes the year he was here. It was a little
really?
too warm for him.
Yeah, it was lovely when I was there. So do you have a daily practice, Art, as a druid?
Yes, when I get up, I come in here and I'll just sit for a minute and talk. I have a matate here. Let me find that. Well, I'm not going to pick it up. It's a stone that was used to grind corn.
Okay.
I found it in a riverbed just north of here. Now, when we were talking about Louisiana, this part of Louisiana, well, most of Louisiana has no rock.
Okay.
We are rock free. But this is a stone about 1 foot long and comparatively round. So it was imported from somewhere.
Okay.
By the Native Americans at some point in time, specifically to grind corn. So I find that very connecting, and holding that is very connecting. Now, I must admit, I have a couple of stones here that I enjoy connecting with. 2 of which came from Wales.
Yeah.
And at the risk of being put on the Interpol's list, I will say I stole them from the Wye River in Wales and brought them back to the States. They keep begging me to take them home, and I would love to do that and hope to very soon. But yeah, I do that, and then walking outside in my yard and looking at my plants and seeing what's going on with butterflies. I've got a lot of, we're moving to all native plants. We're trying to get all native plants in our gardens, which is a slow process. And sometimes it's hard to tell what's a native plant and what is an introduced plant.
That's right.
But we're working on that. I find fooling with plants is good. That's therapeutic. And it gives you a sense of connection as well. You know, the more we learn about how plants communicate with each other and how trees communicate and how forests have these communication systems, we start learning that the natural world that we're a part of is a lot more complicated than we would like to think that it is. So all the old myths, the old stories, and the old feelings about connecting to the land and connecting to the energies of the land are right on target. We don't understand it yet, but the day will come when we might, and hopefully we will.
I was just thinking of, you mentioned the Choctaw earlier, and I know in a previous conversation you mentioned that some had brought their own creation myth. Do you know that myth?
Yes. There are actually two.
Yeah.
The one that probably is founded in reality is that there were two brothers, Chickasaw and Choctaw, and the tribe lived in Texas, what's now Texas, Oklahoma. And the two brothers were given a vision that they had to move. And the way they moved was they'd stick a staff up in the ground every morning, every night. And in the morning, whatever direction the staff was leaning was the direction they would take the tribe.
Okay.
And they did this for months and months and months and months. And finally, they were running short on food. So Chickasaw and Choctaw split the tribe into two parts, and the two brothers each took a part and went walking. Well, Choctaw came to a place and they stuck the staff in the ground, and the next morning it was standing straight up, so they knew that was where they were to stop. And the other brother, Chickasaw, missed the stopping point and wound up going further east, and they later became the Chickasaw.
Okay.
But the other creation myth is that they came out of the ground at a mound known as Naniwaya. Naniwaya is a mound outside Philadelphia, Mississippi. That was considered the home mound of the Choctaw. And it was recently returned to the tribe by the state of Mississippi.
Good.
But the myth there was that the people were underground and there was a fissure in the ground. So they came out of the ground and populated the earth. And that's how people started. So I have the two myths about how they wound up where they are. Actually, the second is the creation myth.
That is beautiful. You seem so connected with the land and the history of your land, between your trees, your history, the ancestors. It's wonderful to hear that.
Oh, I think it's important for me. I'm surprised how unimportant it is to a lot of people, and how important it is to my grandchildren.
Yeah.
They've become so engrossed in today that they just don't see those things. And they're happening all around us. You know, our interactions with the world, and we see things like the climate change issues to our connection with the land. Right now, I'm on an anti-concrete slab kick, if you will.
Talk a little bit about that.
When we pour a concrete slab, we do two things. We introduce an alkaline covering to the land, and that piece of dirt then is, for all intents and purposes, dead. It cannot breathe. nothing can happen. So over time, we've built ribbons of highway that break up migration routes for the wildlife. We've poured huge shopping centers and the like, and that takes out that part of the land. We now have people who are actively planning to leave green space and to build wildlife migration corridors across the highways and the like. But probably I went to a lecture not long ago where they were talking about this. One of the greatest negative impacts on the natural world today is the concrete slab. Yes, we do so much of it. And there are alternatives. There are porous paving materials use, pillar construction instead of slab construction, a lot of things that we can do. I do think we need to pay more attention to our impact on the world around us. And a lot of people don't do that.
No, unfortunately. So when you think of that concern that you have, what gives you hope about it, or do you have any hope?
I see glimmers of hope.
Yeah.
Organizations like Master Naturalist programs, Botanic Garden programs, when the program's set up to involve people, to get people in, are all helping with a lot of that.
Can you just explain what the Master Naturalist, I meant to ask you that earlier, the Master Naturalist, what that is?
Most states have a Master Naturalist program.
Okay.
Master Naturalist program in Louisiana consists of a qualification education program where you go through 10 classes, explore plants, animals, mammals, arachnids, all the different families of animals. When you graduate from that, then you're obligated to do X amount of volunteer work, which can be helping to teach people about the natural world, or interacting with children, or helping with conservation efforts, or whatever. And you're also required to do X number of continuing education hours every year. So it's a program to train citizen scientists, really.
Okay.
And
this is voluntary. It's voluntary, or are you employed to do this?
No, it's voluntary.
Okay, wonderful.
Yeah. I do a lot of that volunteer work. You'd almost think it was full-time work, challenging.
Well, go on.
I was at a program Saturday that was about camellias. Camellias just a plant, but it was a whole program about camellias at the Botanic Gardens. That's another organization I work with, the Baton Rouge Botanic Garden Foundation. So I do some volunteer work with them. In fact, right now I'm the vice president of that organization. I've got my fingers in a lot of these land-connected organizations.
But it strikes me, as one of the values of druidry is about being of service, and that's exactly what you're doing in many different ways, which is wonderful.
And as I was saying earlier, druidry actually opened the door to all these things. It sparked the interest, and I say over time, druidry becomes part of you and
Mhm.
an integral part of who you are. It's not just something that you're going to study or something you're going to look at. Uh, it is part of you. And it comes out in many ways. For me, it comes out in these little volunteer service organization things, nonprofit. For other people, it come out in other ways. I'm still not spitting fireballs out of my fingertips, but
So, what are you most proud of in terms of your own life?
um, mm, I would say my children and grandchildren, but as far as my own accomplishments go, I think I spent 31 years. I worked for Exxon for 31 years, and most of that was in environmental operations.
Okay.
So I think the positive impacts that I had doing that were something that I'm proud of.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I'm proud of the things I've done as a druid. I'm very proud of the idea that uh, druidry led me down these paths of
Mm-hmm.
connection and for the impact it's had on me as a person in terms of tolerance, sense of fairness, and the sense of trying to understand the greater scope of how people interact with each other. And I think that's important.
Mm-hmm.
I am proud of that impact.
Absolutely. Do you have any regrets?
Um, yeah, sometimes I regret that I didn't just start about 40 years ago teaching history somewhere. uh, yeah, I think we all have regrets, but that's part of life.
Yes, it is.
If we live long enough, we're going to have a few regrets.
So I suppose the idea is to minimize them. That to change what it is that now what something you may have regret about in the future.
Oh, yeah, yeah. And to understand them and come to grips with them and realize that uh, it's important to understand yourself. It's as important to understand yourself and forgive yourself as it is to understand and forgive other people.
Forgiveness is very important.
Yes, indeed.
What would you say is the biggest challenge you've ever had that you've actually overcome?
Well, I've been around so long and there've been so many, it's hard to pick one. So, I think probably the biggest challenge to overcome was the idea of possibly of holding biases
Yeah.
or developing biased positions. Um, I don't know that I would have ever done that without druidry.
Okay.
It, yeah, that's probably the biggest one, I would guess.
So if somebody's watching this who doesn't know anything about druidry and they were to ask you, well, what was it about druidry that brought you to that place? Like you've said a number of times throughout our conversation that you wouldn't have done this without druidry. So what is it about it that got you to be the art that you are now?
To peel that out as something discrete and identifiable would be very difficult.
Mm-hmm.
It's the study. There was a point when I was still in the program studying programs where without giving away too much, there is a point where you disassemble yourself and reassemble yourself.
Okay.
And, that can be a very profound experience if people do it in the right sense. Now, obviously, there are a lot of people that just gloss through it and get on down the road. But if you take that in the right spirit and you do it as it's outlined, that makes a tremendous difference, or it can make a tremendous difference to you. So I think that made a big difference. It's just the idea that one of our goals should be operating from a sense of fundamental fairness and justice. But the more we ingrain that, the easier it is to be in that position.
It's lovely to hear you say that. What's the most reckless thing you've ever done, Art? Or have you ever done a reckless thing? I'm sure you have.
Reckless thing?
Yeah.
Probably the most reckless thing I ever did was go to Vietnam in 1967.
Did you go willingly or were you drafted?
Oh, I went willingly. I was a helicopter pilot.
Oh, were you? Okay.
Actually, I got into flying. I wanted to fly, and the Army was the quickest way to get into that field.
Okay.
And so I did. And that was one of the caveats. They would teach me to fly if I would go to Southeast Asia for a little while.
Okay.
So that was probably the most reckless thing I ever did.
What impact? Go on. Sorry.
And that in itself was an interesting experience too.
Would you like to expand on that?
Vietnam itself is a beautiful place, and it's a fascinating place. The people are outstanding. They're very warm and welcoming. Even then, when we're in the midst of conflict, these were just fantastic people, and a fantastic place. But it was just seeing another culture, seeing what at the time were new to me religious systems, Buddhist, Cao Dai, Hindu, that I always found interesting too. So, yeah, that was a mixed blessing. And that's probably enough said about that.
Yeah, it's would you regard yourself as a pacifist now? As druids, we have a peace prayer and we identify as being peacekeepers. What is your view on pacifism now?
I would not regard myself as a pacifist as such.
Yeah.
There are limits. Peace is the goal. Peace is what we work for. But at the same time, I don't think we need to allow misconduct to adversely impact the life that we know.
Yeah.
I would not stand and be killed, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. I think we doodly do what we mustily must till we bustily bust.
Okay. All right. So what are you grateful for in life?
My children.
Yeah.
The opportunity I've had to meet such wonderful people from around the world. The opportunities I've had to talk to people and explore different things, and the opportunities I've had to learn that there is more than me.
Yeah.
There's more than us. So, I'm grateful for a lot of things, and none more than grateful for the people that I interact with. Because I'm fortunate to be in the company of giants.
You're a bit of a giant yourself, certainly physically anyway.
That's for sure.
For those of you who don't know, he's taller than me, and I'm 5 foot tall. So,
6'1" is a little taller than you.
a little taller than me. Yeah. So, what is it that gives you joy?
That varies from day to day.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's a kitten laying on my chest while I'm in my recliner.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's seeing my echinacea plants blooming.
Lovely.
And sometimes it's just being outside and talking with the crows for a little while. I've got a crow call and I'll go out. We have a nice little murder in the neighborhood.
Brilliant.
Sometimes I'll go out and talk to them a little bit with the crow call, and you'll see one of the scouts.
Can you do it? Can you do it?
Yeah, you can do it to a degree.
Can you do it now?
Well, I don't have the call with me in here now.
Oh! I thought you actually do it with your own voice.
No. I have a little crow call. But sometimes one of the scouts will come by and he'll look down, and I can hear him carrying on. I know he's telling the other ones, "Well, this asshole doesn't have any peanuts today. He's just out here messing with us. So let's go somewhere else." But I find the older I get, the simpler things bring me joy.
Wonderful. Do you have any bardic pursuits? I mean, where do you get your Imasi or your Awen from?
That too varies. I write at times. I've been known to do a little drawing. But I would say primarily from writing and from talking to people, from having conversations like this.
Okay.
I find just when you talk with people, it makes you think. And that in itself is a bardic pursuit.
Yes, it is.
In fact, that's probably the seed of all bardic pursuit, is for you to just simply think.
Yes, to have a colloquy, to have an ogle of a conversation. Yes,
indeed. Even if it's with yourself sometimes.
Well, I think it's very useful to hear when somebody asks you a question, even whether you ask yourself a question or somebody else asks you a question, and you're articulating the answer. And it may not be well formed in your head, but that conversation allows you or helps you shape what it is your view is on something.
Absolutely.
And then when you can hear yourself saying it, you may not be so convinced, but if you hear yourself saying it enough, and I'm not talking about convincing yourself of lies, I'm talking about maybe convincing yourself of the truth of the truth of something that's very challenging about yourself, maybe something that you're not owning that's really good or whatever. That when you hear yourself articulate it, it helps you move towards that. Or
sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So you're a writer. What books would you recommend that have had an impact on your life?
Well, I talked about Phillips, The Druid Way.
Yeah.
I like to read Hutton.
Ronald, yeah.
I enjoy reading Ronald Hutton. You have to keep some liquid around because it's a little dry at times. But I like to read Hutton. I like Chris Hughes' stuff.
Yeah.
Christopher's latest book, the Caradwin book, I found to be outstanding, just an exceptional work. William Faulkner. I love William Faulkner, who is an American Southern writer from the 30s and 40s. But Faulkner had a unique ability to build word pictures that are just outstanding. And I like Faulkner, I like Eudora Welty. Some of Ellen Everett Hopman's stuff I liked.
Okay.
There's a lot. I read a lot of stuff and a lot of varied stuff. So I was looking around here. I'm surrounded by books. You can't see them all in here, but I'm surrounded by books in here. In another room, there are 2 walls of books. By my bed, there's enough books to probably kill me if the pile ever fell over. I read a lot.
So, a person in your life that you admire?
I admire a lot of people. I admire you for taking on the challenge of the jobs you're in.
Thank you, Art.
Because that is challenging. I admire Philip for the work he did getting the order up and running.
Absolutely.
Susan Jones is a person that I admire a lot.
Mm-hmm. What do you admire about Susan?
Susan always is a voice of reason in times of trouble.
Mm-hmm.
Very solid and very easy to talk to.
Absolutely.
One of the things I do, Kathleen Harrington takes care of the forums. And I'm a forum administrator too, but my primary job in the forums is being the guy that comes in if there's a real problem and sorts that. As somebody once said, I'm the guy that can tell people to go to hell and make them enjoy it.
Very good.
But I forget where I was going with that. Anyway, Susan's been a big help over a long period of time. There are a lot of people that I admire. One of the other volunteer things I do is with the Air Force Auxiliary, and I'm a government relations advisor with them. So I interact with politicians a lot.
Okay.
It's hard to say I admire a politician, but there's one that I do admire, and I won't mention his name. I don't agree with his politics.
Okay.
I don't agree with a lot of what he said, but over an extended period of time, a number of years, he never told a falsehood to me at any point in time. And then I admire him for that, but that's unusual for people in general, and particularly unusual for politicians.
Absolutely. Yeah. So somebody with integrity and has been able to hold on to it.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's very unique.
Yeah. So we're coming to the end of our time, and this is the question I always ask my guests is, well, I suppose it's 2 parts. What's your favorite season, and what is your favorite ceremony for the Wheel of the Year?
My favorite ceremony, I have 2, and they're Samhain and Beltane.
Samhain and Beltane, okay.
Samhain probably dominates because I have that connection with the ancestors that's going on right in that period of time. I like that transition time of the year. I like the idea of taking time out mentally right then.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say Samhain and Beltane, but of the two, Samhain is probably the dominant.
And that seems to be the favorite of most of my guests, is Samhain.
Understandably so.
And do you have, your favorite season, is that at Samhain time, or do you have another season that?
Yeah, the late fall and winter here. Our fall and winter are mild compared to the rest of the world, to say the very least. But that's the time of the year when I think back on times when I was growing up, times when I spent as a child in the woods at that time of the year, and it's crisp and the leaves are falling and it just feels good. It's a feel-good time of the year for me. So yeah, fall and winter are my favorites.
So of course you won't know in centigrade, will you? Because obviously it's a little cooler there in winter, but nothing like we have mildish winters here in Ireland, but nothing like what you'd have either in the UK or mainland Europe. So what kind of temperatures are you dealing with?
Well, right now, today, we started the day at around 60 degrees Fahrenheit, and it'll get up to about 88 degrees Fahrenheit before the day is over.
Oh, my heart bleeds for you, you poor things.
As we move into winter, we will have temperatures in the 40s and 50s. We'll get our first freeze around maybe the end of October or in November, and it'll be a very mild freeze. We won't get any hard freezes until the end of December or early January.
Oh, you do get them? Okay.
February, we will get freezes. They won't last. It'll only freeze for a couple of days.
Okay.
As a rule. But yeah, generally from middle of November through the middle of February, we're looking at 40s, 50s, 60s, some fluctuation in there. Now, I do remember a year, actually I was a teenager when it occurred, but we had a year where it was 92 on Christmas Eve.
Ooh.
That's always a possibility too.
Not here. Oh, we might find, I remember in the winter of 2010, and I'm going into centigrade now, it was minus 17 on Christmas Eve. And 3 days later on St. Stephen's Day, or Boxing Day, as they say in the UK, it was 10.
Yikes.
Degrees. And then a week later, I was in Tanzania and it was 27 degrees. So I'd gone from, in the space of a week, minus 17 to 27.
Yes.
Just with no air conditioning. So it was just something. So Art, it's been lovely chatting to you, and apologies for all our technological difficulties. I hope they're sorted now. And apologies. So absolute joy talking to you. And I look forward to seeing you either this side of the Atlantic or the other. So
thank you so much for having me. It's been a delight, and it's been fun doing that much thinking this early in the morning, to tell you the truth.
What time is it?
It's 11 o'clock here now.
Oh, okay. So just hang on there. I'm just going to say goodbye to everybody, and I'm just going to switch you off, but stay where you are. Okay. So thank you all for watching, and apologies for the technical breakdown at the beginning of this. We have made several attempts, and I thought we'd stay running with this one. So I look forward to seeing you next week for a live stream where I will be talking to another member of the Order of Bards, Ovates and Druids. So until then, slán go fóill.